Hello, welcome to my channel and thanks for tuning into this video. Today I just want to do a really quick little sort of demonstration and mini review of this by Terry Brightening CC palette. This came out at first, I think in the spring or summer this year, and I think it sold out quite quickly. And then they brought it back, I think around toward the end of November, beginning of December. And that's when I picked it up. So I haven't used it a ton, but I have used it a few times, and I'd certainly have some thoughts to share on it. And I just got an email this morning saying that this is back in stock. So it must have sold out again around the end of November, early December when they first brought it back. But it's back for a limited time, and I assume limited quantities as well. So I thought I'd just do this little video in case anyone is thinking about picking it up while it's available, or if you're just interested in seeing what this palette looks like, then you can just keep on watching. All right, so I actually want to start with eyes. I've just put my foundation on and concealer. It's still kind of setting in to around where I want to put the bronzer. So I'm going to start with the eyes and give the face a little bit of time to settle. So I'm going to start with the bronzer here, and I'm using this jumbo blender, which is a Sonia G brush from the Kiyaki set. And if I'm doing something really simple on the eyes, like just putting bronzer and maybe some blush on the lid and in the crease, which is what I'm doing today, I like to use a big brush like this, because really the idea is to just get sort of as much color over as much of the lid as possible quite quickly. Now, when I use this palette, I find that the bronzer, it does have a bit of an orange undertone to it. However, I don't see that orange undertone as much on my face as I do when I put this on my eyes. I find when I put this on my eyes, it looks really quite orangey. Like you can probably see, it looks very orangey or peachy on the eyes, which I guess if I'm gonna have it look orangey on one place or the other, I'd rather it be on the eyes as opposed to the face. And I'm not sure why it does that, but just something that I have noticed. I'll put it on the lower lash line as well. For that, I'm gonna use my Refer 02. And when I do it on my lower lash line here, pull it all along the lower lash line. And then what I like to do is with the same brush, because it's a little bit more densely packed, I like to pull a little bit more color up on the top lid as well, mainly sort of where I want that color concentrated, because this brush, as I said, it's a little bit more densely packed. And so it's going to give you a little bit more payoff when you use it. And I think that's a good tip for if you're just wanting to use like one shade on your eyes, or at least one matte shade, then you can just use the same shade, but different brushes will give you different effects. So I'm gonna leave the eyes there for now. I will be putting a little bit of blush on top later, but that will happen after I put the blush on my cheeks. I also used the same brush, and just with what was left on there, I just did a little tiny bit of lip contouring. For me, I like it because it makes the lips look a tiny little bit bigger, and it also, I find, balances out the color of the face more. So I find if I don't do that, sometimes it can look really, really pale sort of in this area, and it looks like it doesn't quite go with the rest of the face. So that's the main reason that I like to put a little bit of bronzer or contour around my lips. Now we can move into the face. So for the bronzer, I'm going to start out with this one here. This is the Large Artist brush from Wayne Goss. And this is, I find, a moderately pigmented bronzer. So you can see it's already showing up from one little swipe. And I just want it really sort of diffused on the skin at first, and then I'm actually going to go in a minute with a different brush to sort of accentuate a contoury type of shape. But for now, I'm just getting my sort of base layer of bronzer down. And I always like to put a little bit, just that's left over on the brush usually, just down the sides of the nose. Okay, so you can see the color. This is just a pretty light layer of the bronzer. And as I said, you can perhaps see a little bit of the orangey tones on the face, but I find that more sort of reddish tones come through when I use it on my actual face as opposed to on my eyes. And I suppose it must be because of the reddish tones in my skin that are just sort of coming through as I add this powder onto it and sort of melding with any of the reddy tones that are already in the bronzer. Now I'm going to take the Sculpt 2 brush from Sonia G, and I'm going into the bronzer again, just lightly. And I'm gonna just kind of see that it's created a bit of a stronger contoured line there. And then, so I like to do that anywhere that I want a little bit more concentration of the color, like right up toward the hairline there, maybe right sort of under the jawbone. I just think that's a nice little tip for, again, like using one product for a couple of purposes, so you can sort of contour with your bronzer by using a different brush that will concentrate the product differently. Now on to blush, and for blush, I think I want to use the Sonia G Classic Face, which is the sort of blush type brush that came in the Kiyaki set. And I kind of like the idea, like I used the Jumbo Blender from that set, I like the idea of using your more travel type brushes with a face palette like this, because I think the idea with this sort of a palette is often to be able to use it for travel. So with that in mind, that's also why I am like using it on the eyes, because if you're traveling with a palette, you kind of want it to be multi-purpose and you want it to be able to do as much as it possibly can so that you don't have to bring too much other makeup with you. The other reason, of course, that you might grab for a face palette is if you're in a rush or you just want to get your makeup done really quickly and have it over with. So again, you want your palette to be multifunctional if that's really what you're going for with it. I'm gonna go in with this lighter pink blush first and just kind of putting this all over the cheek there. I like to, with this palette, I like to have the lighter color sort of as my base, and you could just stick with the lighter color. It gives you a really nice sort of natural flush. You can see it there. But then if you're going to be using the deeper one, which I will also use, I'll show you how I like to incorporate that on top of this one. Of course, you can use the deeper one all on its own as well. It's just up to your preference and what kind of a look you're going for, what you're feeling like that day. But I want to show you all the shades in one look today. So you can see it does give a really beautiful, and it's the CC palette, right? So it's part of that line of all of By Terry's Brightening CC products. The thing that I like most from that line is the Brightening CC Serum. And that I find gives you a bit of a lit from within effect. And I find that these are doing the same thing. There's no like discernible shimmer or glitter particles or anything like that in these, but there is a little bit of a sheen to all of these products. So I think that really helps to give that sort of glowy but not shimmery effect. So I think that's good for the lighter colored blush. And then we're going to go into the deep one. And I want to concentrate it a little bit more, just sort of toward the top edge on that one side of the brush. And this one I find is quite pigmented. When I swatch these, I find that all the powders feel the same, except this one feels a little bit harder pressed into the pan. And I think that's because it's so pigmented. I think that was probably done on purpose, so that you don't run into picking up too much of the product. But even then, I think you want to go if you have a skin tone like I do, or you don't like a very, very strong blush regardless of your skin tone, I think that you want to just be aware that this is quite strongly pigmented, at least in my opinion. That's what I find. So as you can see, I'm just sort of concentrating that more sort of toward the top of the cheekbone here, and then just really lightly kind of blending it up. Throw a little bit on the nose. I'm gonna go back into the light pink and just almost using it as kind of a buffing powder here on the cheeks, because I do like quite a blushy look. I don't mind having it sort of all over the cheeks like that. And I'll throw it down on the chin where I'd put the bronzer, a little bit up on the temples, over the nose, and on the eyes too. So using the same brush, I'm just sort of taking that really quickly, sweeping it over the eye. So I think you might be able to see how the color is quite different now that I've added the blush. This one is still looking quite brown and like orangey, whereas this one now, it's toned down that warmth a little bit, and it's added a more rosy look. So again, this is just going to depend on your preference and what you want to do, but I like to have a little bit of blush on the eyes too, and I'll go into that deeper one. And again, just really lightly kind of dusting that all over the eye. And you can sort of pull it as far out as you want to. Now for the highlighter, I'm going to grab this mini cheek. This has quickly become my favorite brush for highlighter. So I'm gonna go into this highlight here. Just pop that on. I'm looking at my eyes more closely now through this mirror, and I'm really liking the effect that I have, like from the mix with the blush and bronzer up here, and then just the bronzer down below. They look really nice together, those tones. And it looks like you maybe put a little bit more effort into your eye makeup than I really did. So that's always nice. Now you can see this powder. I think you can see that it's quite yellow in tone, and you can definitely see that in the pan, right? It's almost a sort of buttery yellow color. Overall, I find this palette quite warm. So I've sort of demonstrated the orangey tones that are in the bronzer. The pinks I find a little bit warm, and I'm gonna do some comparison swatches later with one of my sort of what I would consider a more cooler or at least more neutral toned blush. So we'll be able to compare those tones. And yeah, the highlighter, it has that yellow in it, so it's quite warm, but it's not overly strongly pigmented. It's not too dark or anything, even for my very fair skin. So I think this palette certainly will work for those with skin as pale as mine, and up into probably around the light medium to medium spectrum. After that, I don't know how well this bronzer is going to work. It can build up, but you can only do so much with building if the tone isn't deep enough. This blush, I'm not sure how that will show up on deeper skin tones. It could look really nice, but I just don't know how it would play with the skin tone. This one I think will show up on quite a lot of skin tones. As I said, it's quite pigmented and it has a real vibrancy to it. And the highlight, again, I don't know how that's going to work. One thing that it has in its favor for probably a deeper skin tone is that it is, it's warmer. So it's not going to be quite as apt to look ashy on a skin tone that is deeper. But again, I don't know really how it's going to work. So if you do have a deeper skin tone, or you know someone who has tried this palette, or if you are more knowledgeable than I am and you can just take a look at this and you kind of know how it's going to work on different skin tones, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, because I don't really know how this is going to translate across the skin tone spectrum. Okay, so this is how it's looking with all of those powders on my face and on the eyes. I think I might as well throw on a little bit of mascara. and then I'll come back and we'll do some swatching and comparison swatching, and I'll just sort of round up my thoughts on this whole palette. Now let's get into the swatches. So I'm gonna first start just with swatching this palette, and then we'll throw in some comparisons. As I said earlier, this darker pink is certainly harder pressed in the pan than the other powders here. All right, so there are the swatches. So the highlight, it's a bit hard to see, but you can see that sort of gold tone highlight there. And then of course the lighter pink blush, the deeper pink blush, and the bronzer. And looking at them all like this, yes, the bronzer looks quite orange, and I can see that too when I'm looking at my eyes. There's almost a bit of a sort of sunsetty kind of effect with the pink and the orange there. So I do think this bronzer is quite orange, but somehow I seem to be managing to get away with it. This might be a palette that I wear more in the summertime when I am really going for more warmer looks, but I can make it work even in the winter time too. It just depends what kind of a look you're going for. So we have the swatches there. Now I want to do some comparisons. Starting with the bronzer, I have two bronzers that I want to compare this one to. So there's the By Terry. This is the La Mer bronzer from a couple of summers ago. And this I think is probably, other than the one in this palette, the most orangey sort of warm toned bronzer that I have. So I wanted to see how these would compare. And I've just gone in through all the shades there. And there it is. So it's funny, in the swatches, this is the By Terry. It almost looks sort of apricot-y. It's almost a little bit peachy in comparison to this one. You can still see the warmth of the undertones here, but this one is looking more peachy pinky in comparison. At least that's what I'm seeing. The other bronzer that I wanted to compare it to is the Tom Ford Terra, because this is one bronzer that I find is quite red in its undertones. I don't find it orangey at all, but I do find it actually quite red. So I just wanted to see how that would compare. So there's the Tom Ford Terra. So you can see, I think that the Tom Ford looks a little bit more neutral in tone, and I can see those reddish undertones, especially when contrasting with the more sort of pink and orange tones in this bronzer, as well as a little bit of the orange in that one. So again, that's Tom Ford Terra, that's the By Terry CC bronzer, and that is the La Mer bronzer from a couple of summers ago. Moving on now to the blushes. I'm going to do each one separately, and then I'm gonna, I think, mix them together, because I think that a lot of people would probably wear it that way. I'm just wiping off residual bronzer there. So that's each one separately, and now together. Okay, and there was one blush that I wanted to compare it to, and it's the Sisley Orchidee Rose, because I find this to be more of a cool toned pink, or at least neutral, if not cool toned. I don't find it too warm. So I'm just gonna swish together all of those colors and pop that on. So to me, that is, yes, looking a lot more cool toned. I feel that I can see more sort of blue and purpley undertones in this one than I can in the By Terry palette. Yeah, in comparison, I'm finding the By Terry palette almost looks a little bit more corally pink, whereas this one is more of a sort of true or cooler pink. So again, that's the lighter CC from Terry. That's the deeper CC palette blush. That's them mixed together, and then there's the Sisley. Now I have a couple of highlighters. So I have the By Terry one there already. It might be hard to see these swatches, but we'll just see what we can do. And then I have the Charlotte Tilbury Bar of Gold, and I find this one is quite yellowy looking as well. So I wanted to just see how these tones compared. Now, obviously the finish is very different. The By Terry, as I said, it's not shimmery or glittery, and it's not metallic in any way, whereas these Charlotte Tilbury highlighters are quite metallic in their finish. So the By Terry to me is a little bit more along the lines of those hourglass, the hourglass highlights and their powders, which are a little bit more subtle in terms of the glow that you get from them. And in terms of the tones, I find the By Terry actually quite a bit yellower, more orangey, and a little bit deeper. But that could also be because you're not getting the reflect that the Charlotte Tilbury is giving. So there's those two, and then the other one that I wanted to throw in there, just for curiosity, was this Dominique Cosmetics one, which is a cream highlighter. So again, a very different finish, but I wanted to just sort of see how those tones compared. And again, I think the Dominique is a little bit brighter, although of course the finish can lend itself to that as well. But it looks a little bit more neutral in tone than this one, which again is, I find, quite warm. So that's the Dominique Cosmetics, the Golden Dew highlighter. That's the By Terry, and then this is the Charlotte Tilbury Bar of Gold, the lightest yellowy shade in that palette. Now to finish up my thoughts on this palette, I like it. I like the way it performs. I've already kind of talked about the tones quite a lot, so I don't think I need to say anything more about that. And I've talked about the finish too, where it's not a very shiny finish, but it gives you a beautiful sort of lit from within type of glow. In terms of the formula, I think the formula is very good. It does have a scent. It has that By Terry Rose scent, so just like every other By Terry product, it has that rosy scent to it. Although I find this one is a little bit more subdued than some of the other products, like the CC Serum and the Baume de Rose. I find those are a little bit more heavily scented than this one. In terms of what type of formula it is, it's not a baked gelée or anything like that. It's just a traditional powder formula. It is, I would say, moderately pigmented. So with that knowledge, that can kind of tell you how you want to apply it. If you want less pigment from it, then you want to use quite a fluffy brush that isn't going to pick up too much product and is going to diffuse everything very nicely. If you want a little bit more pigment from it, then you can use a brush like the Sculpt 2, a more densely packed brush, or one that is going to pick up product a bit better with its fibers. So typically a natural fiber brush is going to pick up a bit more product. Now the packaging is gorgeous. It's just stunning. I love the tones here. So we have the sort of metallic orangey, we have the pinks, and we have the more cream colors. And I think that the colors on this packaging do really reflect the effect that you're going to get from the products in the palette. It's a very warm and sunny kind of look. And I've been talking about how warm toned I find it to be, and I think that makes sense. This is called the Sunny Flash. That's the shade of it. So that makes me think about the effect of sunlight, the warmth from it, the yellow and orangey tones from the sunlight. So I think that this palette perfectly evokes its name and its purpose. The design is beautiful. It's this mandala design, but sort of looks like a flower. So we have the rose here in the middle, and then it almost looks like there are petals coming all the way around it. And even the back is a beautiful metallic, pinky sort of rose goldy type of color. It has a nice weight to it, but not too heavy, but it's not too light, and just all over A+++ for the packaging. It's gorgeous. The powders themselves are also beautiful to look at. They all have this rose imprint in them, and I've used this several times, and the imprint is still there in all of the powders. It's going down a little bit in some of them, but the imprint will at least stick around for a little while. You can enjoy the look of those powders as well. And even the inside of the palette has that pink metallic sort of rose gold. That's the same as what's on the back of the palette. And that's pretty much all I wanted to say about this palette. I hope this video was helpful if you were thinking about picking this palette up, or at least enjoyable to watch if you just wanted to see how the palette performs and what the colors look like. If you have any questions or comments, please leave those down below. I read all the comments and respond to all of them. If you'd like to see more from me, I would love to have you subscribe to my channel. And thank you so much for watching this video. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.